You ever heard someone say, that's useless information? You know, no one cares about that. No one needs to know that. That's useless information. I've always thought to myself, how can information be useless? It may be non-applicable to that specific situation, but how can information, assuming that it's accurate and true, assuming that it's true, how can it be useless? Then I really think to myself, oh wait, you have to take into consideration that society is literally, and I'm not being an asshole. I don't mean to be an asshole by saying this, but society is literally built for lower intelligent people to be functional. And I'm not saying that as some type of a knock or I'm not saying whether it's good or bad. I'm just simply making an observation, but so if you take into consideration that the average intelligence, the average IQ of a person in the United States is 98. Yeah. So if you think about it, literally, the average person has a double-digit IQ. So when you hear somebody say, oh, that information is useless. Yeah, to who? A guy with a double-digit IQ? It's like, then you gotta consider that, human traits are distributed on a Gaussian curve or a normative curve or a bell curve. So that means that approximately 68% of all people are within one standard deviation of that 98 IQ. So you do the math. All right. So basically there's like 34.4% on the second standard deviation on one side and about that same percent on the other side for the second standard deviation. Just think about that. Like, just do the math on that. And if I found, as I've done the math on that, a lot of my questions have been answered. It's just saying, don't attribute malice where ignorance or stupidity will suffice. And that makes perfect sense. No, not all these people in society, they don't mean any harm by the ignorant things that they do or say. They literally, they can't help themselves. They can't control that. You're telling me the average person has a double-digit IQ? Not to say that, IQ is the end-all, be-all measurement of intelligence. But, no, it is a proxy. Can't just chuck it out of the window because, it may disagree with your preconceived notion. But, that has to account for something. So it's like, yeah, that may be, you may consider that information useless. But what about to the people that have a triple-digit IQ? People that actually, want an accurate model of reality. Is that useless information? Is it useless to them? The thing that I think most people misunderstand is when you say this is useless or that doesn't matter, assuming that the information is accurate, that is necessarily not true. If I say that gravity, that the objects fall towards the Earth at 9.8 meters per second squared, and you say that doesn't matter, you're necessarily incorrect. Because just because in your day-to-day life, in your, colloquial layperson type of life, that you don't see the importance or the effects of said information, doesn't mean that it doesn't apply. It's kind of like when I say you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. Because whether or not you believe it, whether or not you know it, the facts are the facts, the truth is the truth. Ignorance or being uncomfortable with those facts has absolutely no bearing on whether or not they're true. I see that a lot, that, you see, people simply parlaying evidence, parlaying facts, and then somebody that has a viewpoint or a belief that is contradictory to that fact, and they get offended and they say things like, that doesn't matter, or they'll just flat out disregard it, say it's not true, even though it's been demonstrated to be true. And then they'll ad hominem attack the person parlaying the fact, accusing them of being mean, accusing them of, being a bully, etc., etc. It's like, come on, people. Come on. Can't we have rational discourse? Can't we parse things that, can we parse topics that we don't necessarily agree with, or maybe we haven't thought of, maybe we haven't fully considered? Aren't there things that we can agree with the bulk of it, but then there's some nuances here and there, some intricacies, complexities that we kind of have a little bit of a disagreement, but, maybe that we, for the most part, agree on? Aren't there things that, the bulk of, man, that's a bad thing? We can all agree that, most of this is objectively, this is a, bad thing, or whatever you want to call it. And then, well, maybe on this specific point, in a vacuum, that guy had a point. You don't have to like the guy. Let's take that out of it. Let's take the bias out of it. Let's take the personal ad hominem attacks out of it. Let's take the logical fallacies out of it. Let's try to take the cognitive biases out of it. It's not a personal attack. It has nothing to do with whether or not we believe in it, whether or not we want to believe. We're simply discussing the evidence and whether or not we think the evidence is likely true. Now, that's another misconception. It's like, you'll have an intellectual discussion, an intellectual debate about a subject, a topic that a guy said, and then you'll attack the actual points that the person made, or not attack, but you'll dissect those points and you'll say, this is true. I haven't seen any evidence for this. That's not true. This is true, this is true, this is that. And let's say, for example, in this hypothetical, you've come to the conclusion that this person's points are mostly true. And they'll accuse you, they'll say, oh man, you're defending this person, you're defending this person's personal beliefs, you're defending this person's personal moral judgments. I'm like, dude, I don't even know this guy. I'm simply dissecting his points, like him, I don't fucking know the guy. Or if I know him, I hate this guy. But what he said on this specific topic, he was correct. We don't need the bias. Or if you parse a person's opinions or points on the topic, and it turns out to be wrong. Well, they were wrong on these points. You hate this person. No, it has nothing to do with hate or like or, no. I judge the argument based on its own merits, not the merits of the person making it. All right. See, like I said, I have to keep saying this. I don't have a dog in a fight. I don't have a horse in a race. I don't have any stock either way. I just want to know whether is this shit true. And basically, I don't know, is this shit true? Since I want to know if the shit's true, I'm trying to have as good of a bullshit detector as possible. That's like the most, straightforward bro, layperson type of just on the nose way I can explain that. I want to have a good bullshit detector, man. That's what rational skepticism is, man. It's not about being a fucking whatever the fuck any person ever told you about, just intellectualism or science or philosophy or anything, or trying to acquire truth. All right. Let's say, for example, like it's been evidence has shown that, for example, a judge will give out harsher sentences when they haven't eaten. Now you take that in practical application. You see this judge, he hasn't eaten, and he's throwing out fucking football numbers like it's fucking candy on a fucking float on a parade, throwing this shit out like it ain't shit, man. Are you up to this judge, this person, and you ask them, why are you just throwing out these big sentences and these life sentences? And so, why are you doing that? And he'll swear up and down that, well, I'm just following the law. The law says this guy is, this crime, you can give him between this amount of years and this amount of years. I'm just doing what the law says. When you look at the evidence, no. Did you have lunch? Oh, come to think of it, I didn't have lunch. And it's things like that people they aren't cognizant of, but that definitely have a huge impact on their decision making. And it's like, you can't ignore those things if you're trying to make rational decisions, because they do have a huge impact. They do play a part. It's not useless information. It's not useless information. Just because you either can understand it or refuse to understand it, it doesn't make it not true. I can't express that enough. You know how being wrong feels? Exactly like being right. Exactly like being right. That's why knowledge is a subset of belief. Because when presented a claim, in that moment, you're either convinced or not convinced. Those are the only two options. Convinced, not convinced. Those are the only two options. And with that question, that prong answers the question of belief. Are you convinced of this claim? Right? And that may seem counterintuitive because, you think of, knowledge. No, it's things that we know, then it's things that we believe. No. When it comes to epistemology, knowledge is a subset of belief because we have to tackle that question. We have to answer that question first in the chain of epistemology, right? So there's things that belief, and then what is the evidence for this belief, right? Are we convinced for good reasons? So it's always a good rule of thumb to consider what standard of evidence or what led you to be convinced of this thing, because you can't control your beliefs. You're merely convinced or not. But it's a good rule of thumb, if you want to be a good rational scientific skeptic, to consider, is the reason that I'm convinced of this thing, if I try to explain that to someone who hasn't had my personal life experiences or emotional ties to that thing, would they be convinced of that for the same reason? Is it convincing to them? That's a good rule of thumb. It's one thing to say you're convinced of something. No, see, this is the difference, because when it comes to opinion, your personal subjective experience, that's all you need. But when it comes to whether or not something is true, I'm not saying that your anecdote is completely useless or it's completely has no effect, but it's very small comparatively to, for example, scientific evidence. But yeah, it's a good rule of thumb. Question your beliefs, because being wrong feels exactly like being right. So with that being said, how do we go about determining who's right, right? You think you're right, I think I'm right. How do we determine who's actually right? And this is where something like skepticism comes in, trying to eliminate as many biases and fallacies and irrationalities as possible to reduce uncertainty and find out if something is likely true, because absolute certainty is something that we may never actually be able to prove, right? But what's an interesting phenomenon? The Dunning-Kruger effect, which basically means the more you know, the less confident you are, or the less confident you appear, because of your awareness of how much you don't know. And conversely, the least you know, a person that knows less is more likely to appear more confident and more knowledgeable because they're not aware of how much they don't know. So, basically, a smarter person looks less sure. The more ignorant person seems more sure. So, that's an interesting concept. Because you see that a lot with, these so-called gurus, these gurus. What does that even mean? That word is shrouded in magical thinking, right? This concept that this one chosen person has all of this forsaken, unforeseen, unknowable knowledge that only he can understand, and everyone else is just a stupid peasant or whatever the fuck, It's like the gurus, they'll make the most money because their marketing is, this is the one tip your doctor doesn't want you to know, the one trick. This is the one trick your doctor doesn't want you to know. This is the new breakthrough in technology, the number one, the new super one magic, this magical type of hyperbolic, exaggerated, type of messaging. Then you look at the evidence-based guys and they're just like, well, the evidence suggests that this is probably the case, but we need more studies to further conclude that. We have this thing, it does this, and the side effects are this and that, but as far as what we know or what we understand, this is what we have. Or do you do this way? How do you do that? This. How do you do this? Well, this and that. Oh, okay. And they're not gonna make as much money because it's a logical response. It's just, well, it's evidence-based. It's not magical. It's not, simple. Because reality is often, it's more complicated. It's more complex than people like to make it out. You can simplify it so that more people can understand it. But just because you simplify it in a way to explain to somebody doesn't mean that the underlying mechanisms are simple or the underlying mechanisms aren't complex. It's another concept. It's another thing that I see, the people, let's say, for example, a person that, they're sort of, they're kind of held conscious or whatever. They watch what they eat. They eat pretty healthy. They exercise, etc., get their blood work done, supplementation, whatever, etc. And they're seen as a health nut. I'm just using that as an example for this concept that I guess, it's like on one end, you have people saying, oh, this guy's irrationally concerned. Well, could it be the case that you're irrationally unconcerned? It's not that this guy's irrational or that this guy's extreme. No, he's just simply doing something that, the majority of society, for a multitude of reasons, may have been persuaded to not do, or to not pay attention to, or to not care about. It's like, it's a weird concept, a weird phenomenon that you have a group of people, you know, trying to investigate things that most people aren't even aware of. You know, it's like you see this guy. This guy's overly. This guy is not overly fixated, but he seems to be, uh, you know, thinking real hard about this thing over here, and the average person is like, "What the hell is it? What the fuck is this guy talking about? What is he on about?" You know, that's useless information. No, it's not useless information. It's just that the way society is structured, you know, most people are conditioned to not even be aware of that thing that does exist, by the way, does exist. So necessarily or has an impact on reality. You know, they're conditioned to not either not be aware of it or just not care about it. So yeah.